The first time I noticed it, I was sitting 18 inches from a brand new 5-inch television. I was watching a documentary about the deep ocean, and the black water on the screen wasn't black. It was a kind of dim, washed-out gray, like someone had laid a sheet of tracing paper over the image. I turned the brightness down. I changed the picture mode from vivid to movie to cinema to filmmaker. The gray stayed. I assumed the panel was bad. I packed it up to return it. Then, before I drove to the store, I plugged in my old television, the one I'd had for 6 years. The black on that one wasn't black either. Same washed-out gray, same tracing paper. 2 different brands, 2 different years, 2 different price points, and the exact same flaw. That's when I stopped assuming it was a defect and started assuming it was a decision. Then I found something I should not have been able to find. It was a service manual, not the glossy user guide that comes in the box. The internal one, the one technicians use when a unit comes back for warranty repair. I found it by accident, looking for a part number on a forum where TV repair guys swap PDFs. The document was 47 pages long. On page 12, there was a section titled Service Mode Access. Below it, a sequence of remote control button presses. Volume down, then mute, then power, held for 2 seconds. The manual described, in the dry language manuals use, a hidden menu containing white balance controls, gamma curves, individual color channel adjustments, panel uniformity correction, and something called factory calibration override. None of these controls existed in the user menu I'd been clicking through for 6 years. They had been there the entire time. They were just locked behind a key combination that was never printed in anything a customer would ever read. And the manual noted almost as a footnote that these settings were the same ones used during factory final inspection, which meant the television had been calibrated properly once before it left the factory, and then the calibration had been buried. That footnote pointed backward, because if the factory had the tools to make the picture correct and then chose to ship the television with the picture incorrect, somebody made that choice on purpose decades ago and it stuck. So I started walking the trail. It begins in 1953, in a laboratory at RCA in Princeton, New Jersey. A team, led by an engineer named Alfred Goldsmith, was finalizing the color standard that would become National Television System Committee, NTSC. They set a specific white point, called a luminant C, and a specific gamma curve, around 2.2. That television broadcasts in North America would follow for the next 70 years. Every show, every commercial, every film transferred to video was mastered against that standard. Televisions, in theory, were supposed to display it. In a studio monitor that cost more than a car, they did. In the television sold to your grandparents at Sears, they did not. The cheap sets ran hot, oversaturated, blue shifted, because phosphors that ran blue looked brighter on a showroom floor. A brighter set sold against a dimmer set sitting next to it. The trail picks up again in 1987, when a group of engineers, broadcasters, and post-production professionals formed an organization called the Imaging Science Foundation. Their founder, Joel Silver, started training technicians to calibrate televisions to the broadcast standard the manufacturers were ignoring. The Imaging Science Foundation, the ISF, documented, in writing, that out of the box. A typical consumer television was off the broadcast standard by 20% to 40% on color temperature alone. The color of human skin, the color of a clear sky, the color of black itself, were all wrong, on purpose, because wrong sold better in fluorescent light. ISF calibration became a service. It cost, and still costs, between $250 and $400 per television. The trail moves to 2008. A company called THX, founded by George Lucas to certify movie theater sound, began licensing a display mode called THX Cinema. Manufacturers paid THX for the badge. The mode, when selected, pulled the television closer to the broadcast standard. Not all the way, closer. The same engineers who built the cheap, blue-shifted, oversaturated default mode also built the accurate mode, and put the accurate mode behind a logo you had to know to look for. By 2018, the Ultra HD Alliance, made up of every major manufacturer, codified a setting called Filmmaker Mode. Filmmaker Mode disables motion smoothing, sets gamma correctly, sets white point correctly, sets color space correctly. It is, essentially, the calibration the factory already performed before the television left the building. The press releases described it as a new feature. It was not new, it was the original. And by the time I sat down in front of my new 5-inch panel, watching that washed-out documentary, every television sold in America had. Behind a remote control sequence printed only in a service manual, the exact controls a $400 professional calibration would adjust. The capability had been there the whole time. The decision to hide it was 70 years old. Here is how the mechanism actually works, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. A television panel is made of millions of tiny red, green, and blue subpixels. The brightness of each subpixel at a given input signal is controlled by a curve called gamma. The relative balance of red, green, and blue at peak white is called color temperature, measured in Kelvin. The broadcast standard wants 6,500 Kelvin. A factory default television out of the box usually sits between 9,000 and 120,000 Kelvin, which is the color temperature of a cloudy sky. Not a tungsten lamp, not human skin, not the inside of any room you have ever lived in. That extra blue makes the screen look brighter under store lighting by about 15%. It also makes every face on the screen look slightly sick. The service menu lets you reduce the blue gain, raise the red gain a touch, and pull the white point down to 6,500 Kelvin. It lets you flatten the gamma curve. That dark scenes show actual detail in the shadows instead of crushing everything below 20% brightness into a single block of gray. It lets you turn off the dynamic contrast circuit that is constantly, frame by frame, lying to your eyes about how bright the image should be. You can verify this yourself in the next 2 minutes. Pull up a black screen on your television. A YouTube test pattern works. Or just pause on the credits of any movie. Stand 15 feet back. Look at the screen. If it is glowing dim gray instead of disappearing into the wall, your panel is uncalibrated. Now go into the user menu and turn off any setting called dynamic contrast, dynamic backlight, or eco mode. Turn off motion smoothing, sometimes called auto motion plus or true motion. Watch the same black screen. It will already look closer to actual black. You just undid the first layer of factory deception with 3 button presses. Now for the real fix. The service menu codes are different for every manufacturer, and they change by model year, but they are documented. For most Samsung sets, you press mute, then 119, then enter, with the television powered on. For most LG sets, you point the remote at the screen and press the menu button 5 times rapidly, or hold the settings button for 10 seconds. For Sony, it's display, then channel up, then 5, then volume up, then power. For TCL and Hisense running Roku or Google TV, you go into the device settings. Enable developer mode by clicking the build number 7 times, the same trick Android phones use. Once you are in the service menu, do not touch anything you do not understand. The menu can brick the television if you change the wrong value. What you are looking for is white balance, sometimes called WB or color temperature fine adjust. Inside that submenu, you will see 6 values: R gain, G gain, B gain, R offset, G offset, B offset. Gains control the bright end of the picture. Offsets control the dark end. For a starting point, that gets you about 80% of the way to a professional calibration on a typical 2022 to 2024 panel. Reduce B gain by between 8 and 15 steps. Reduce B offset by between 3 and 6 steps. Leave red and green alone unless you have a colorimeter. If you want to do it properly, a basic colorimeter, the X-Rite 1 Display Studio, runs about $170 on Amazon. The free software, HCFR or DisplayCal, will walk you through every adjustment in real time. Total time investment, from opening the box to a finished calibration, is about 90 minutes. Total cost, $170, one time, for a tool you will use on every television and monitor you own for the next 10 years. Compare that to $250 to $400 per screen for an ISF technician to make the same adjustments using the same menu you now know how to open. The picture, when you are done, will look, at first, wrong, dimmer, warmer, almost yellow. That is because your eyes have been trained for years to expect the blue-shifted, oversaturated factory default. Give it 3 days. By day 4, you will not be able to look at an uncalibrated television in a store without seeing the lie. I held one piece of this story back, because it is the piece that made me stop and put the remote down. In 1953, when RCA finalized the NTSC standard in that Princeton laboratory, the engineers building it were not thinking about home consumers. They were thinking about military communications, medical imaging, and air traffic control. Accurate color on a screen was a matter of life and death in those applications. A radar operator who misread a contact because his display ran blue could miss an incoming aircraft. A surgeon reading an early color X-ray needed the red of blood to be the red of blood. The calibration tools that would later be buried in a service menu were originally built. The United States Air Force, in a 1956 specification document numbered MIL M19595, required every color display sold to the Department of Defense to hold a white point within 100 Kelvin of the standard, verified at the factory with the adjustment controls accessible to the operator, not hidden, accessible. The military understood, 70 years ago, that a display you cannot calibrate is a display you cannot trust. Those same controls, on the same panels, built in many cases by the same parent corporations that hold defense contracts, were quietly moved behind a service code the day they were sold to civilians. Not because the technology changed, because the customer changed. A pilot would refuse a miscalibrated display. A shopper in a big box store, standing under fluorescent lights, would pick the bluer one off the shelf and take it home. The global television market is worth roughly $130 billion a year. The professional calibration industry built on top of it, the ISF technicians, the THX licensing fees, the Filmmaker Mode marketing campaigns, exists entirely of a decision, made decade after decade, to ship the product with the wrong settings. Sell the right settings back, piece by piece, to anyone who noticed. You bought the television. You paid for the panel. You paid for the processor. You paid, somewhere in that price, for the engineers who calibrated it on the factory floor before it was boxed. The calibration was always yours. They just didn't give you the key. And the key, it turns out, has a serial number, or rather a sequence, a specific button order, held for a specific number of seconds, sometimes with the television in standby, sometimes with the unit fully powered, sometimes with the input set to a channel that no longer broadcasts anywhere in the developed world. On a Panasonic Plasma from 2011, the Model TC, P50ST30 specifically, the menu opens with volume down on the set itself held simultaneously with info on the remote for roughly 3 seconds, followed by a brief pause and then a power cycle that produces what the service literature calls a hotel mode override. On a Sony Bravia from the same era, you press display, then channel 5, then volume plus, then power, in that exact order, within a window of about 2 seconds. Miss the window and the television simply ignores you. There is no error message. There is no feedback. The set acts as though you did nothing at all, and that silence is itself a kind of door. Locked from the outside, opened only by people who already know it exists. In 1987, a technician named Robert Hartline, working out of a repair shop in Fort Wayne, Indiana, began compiling these codes into a binder he carried from job to job. He had no internet. He had no manufacturer support line that would speak to him without a dealer certification number. So he wrote them down by hand, on lined paper, with the model number on the left and the key press sequence on the right. When he retired in 2003, the binder was 1,600 pages thick. His son scanned it, uploaded it, and within 4 months it had been downloaded more than 200,000 times. The manufacturers, who had never publicly acknowledged that such codes existed, sent no takedown notices. They could not. The codes were not copyrighted. They were not patented. They were simply unspoken, and once spoken, they could not be unspoken again. What Hartline understood, and what the manufacturers feared, is that the asymmetry of information was the entire business model. The same television, calibrated correctly, costs the factory nothing extra to ship. The bill of materials is identical. The panel is identical. The firmware is identical. What changes is only the value of the device to the person who owns it. That value can be inflated or deflated by a single Boolean variable in non-volatile memory. Flip the bit, and the customer has a reference monitor. Leave the bit alone, and the customer has a showroom dazzler that needs to be replaced in 4 years. It never looked quite right, and they assumed it was the panel aging. The panel was not aging. The settings were lying. Consider the numbers. A typical LED LCD television, properly calibrated, will reach what colorists call delta E values below 2 across the majority of the grayscale. This means the difference between what the display shows and what the signal demands is smaller than the human eye can reliably detect. The same television, in its out-of-box state, routinely measures delta E values of 8, 10, sometimes 15 at the brightest portions of the image. The blue channel has been pushed so far past neutral that white objects on screen take on the cast of a swimming pool at noon. 15 delta E is not a subtle error. It is the visual equivalent of mistuning a piano by a full semitone and then selling it as a concert instrument. Nobody would accept that from a piano. We accept it from televisions because we have been trained, slowly, over 4 decades, to believe that the television we received is the television that exists. There is a counter-argument, and it deserves a hearing. The manufacturers will say, if pressed, that the service menu is hidden because users break televisions when they enter it. They will cite cases of consumers who adjusted the EEPROM settings without understanding what they were doing, rendered the unit unbootable, requiring a mainboard replacement that the warranty would not cover. This is true. It happens. A technician in Glasgow named Ian McRae, who has been repairing flat panels since 2004, estimates that perhaps 1 inch every 80 service menu interventions by an untrained user results in a brick television. The cost of that brick is usually between $400 and $1,200 depending on the model. But notice what the counter-argument concedes. It concedes that the menu exists. It concedes that the controls are meaningful. It concedes that the difference between a calibrated and uncalibrated television is large enough to be worth protecting consumers from their own curiosity. What it does not concede, and what it cannot honestly concede, is that the same protective instinct could be served by shipping the television correctly calibrated in the first place, with the menu locked only against further changes rather than locked against the user's own access to what they have already paid for. The truth is that breakage is a convenient excuse for a practice that predates the breakage by 30 years. The service menus were hidden on cathode ray tube televisions in 1968, when the only thing inside the menu was vertical hold and horizontal sync, neither of which could brick anything. They were hidden because hiding them created a service economy. The service economy created a revenue stream that flowed from the customer back to the manufacturer through authorized repair networks that charged $80 an hour to turn a screw that the customer could have turned for free. That revenue stream still flows. It flows through the ISF certifications, which cost calibrators around $1,500 to obtain and require periodic renewal. It flows through the THX optimizer disc, which was sold separately for years before being bundled into Pixar releases. It flows through the increasingly elaborate Filmmaker Mode partnerships, where a director's name is rented out to endorse a setting that simply turns off the worst of the factory tampering, presents itself as a premium feature rather than the default state any honest manufacturer would have shipped in the first place. Every layer of that economy depends on the menu staying closed for most people and opening only for the few who pay the toll.